The Vanguard drifted through the void, its sleek hull scarred from the countless battles humanity had fought in the wake of the Coalition's collapse. The stars outside the bridge windows were cold and distant, reflecting the sense of isolation that had come to define humanity's place in the galaxy. Captain Elara Storm stood at the helm, her hands gripping the polished console as she stared at the holographic star map before her. The galaxy had been torn asunder by betrayal, its once glorious alliances shattered like a fragile vase. Now it was up to her to rebuild what had been lost. Humanity had been a proud member of the Galactic Coalition, a united front of various species working together to maintain peace. But that unity had crumbled under the weight of political intrigue, dark secrets, and the opportunism of races hungry for power. The Drael had turned on their allies, and the Varka, once trusted diplomats, had secretly joined the Drael in a plot to control the galaxy. The Kelari, the peacekeepers, had gone silent, retreating into their homeworlds as their fragile diplomacy cracked under the strain of war. Humanity was left adrift, surrounded by enemies who viewed them as nothing more than a broken relic of a lost era. Elara's mission was clear. She had to restore these alliances, to reach out to the remaining factions and convince them that unity was the only path to survival. But the task seemed impossible. Each faction had its own grievances, its own reasons for distrust, and humanity's reputation had been marred by years of conflict. Yet, Elara knew that without these alliances, the galaxy was doomed. The Drael and Varka were preparing for their next great conquest, and if humanity remained alone, they would fall. "Captain, we're approaching the Kelari border." Lieutenant Nera's voice broke through the tension in the room. Elara turned to face her second-in-command, a seasoned officer with an unwavering loyalty to the cause. But even Nera's calm demeanor couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes. "Prepare for long-range communications," Elara ordered, her voice steady despite the churning storm of thoughts in her mind. The Kelari had always been humanity's closest allies, but their hesitation in recent years spoke volumes about the fractured state of the galaxy. If the Kelari refused to meet, if they turned their backs on humanity, Elara's entire mission would be at risk. The bridge crew worked in silence, the hum of the ship's engines and the soft beeping of the console, the only sounds breaking the stillness. Elara could feel the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. She knew this meeting would set the tone for everything that followed. If the Kelari refused to listen, it would send a message to every other species that humanity was no longer worth saving. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, the screen flickered to life, and the stern face of Talon, the Kelari ambassador, appeared. His dark, angular features were set in an expression of disinterest, but Elara could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. The Kelari had always been masters of diplomacy, but even they couldn't hide their feelings about what had happened to the Coalition. "Captain Storm," Talon's voice was cool, devoid of warmth. "I did not expect to hear from you so soon after the collapse. What is it that humanity seeks now?" Elara took a steadying breath. "We seek your help, Ambassador. The galaxy is on the verge of total collapse. The Drael and Varka are preparing to conquer everything in their path. We need your support, now more than ever." Talon's gaze remained unflinching. "Humanity's actions have caused enough damage. Why should we risk our people to restore what was once lost?" Elara's mind raced. This wasn't a simple negotiation. This was a test. The fate of everything depended on how she played her cards now. "I know the Kelari value peace above all else," she said, her voice sharp. "But if you do nothing, the galaxy will fall into an even darker era. We need you, Talon. Together, we can rebuild. But if you turn your back on humanity, you'll condemn us all." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Talon's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Elara thought she had lost him. But then he spoke, his voice cold but resolute. "We will meet you. But don't mistake this as an agreement. You have much to prove, Captain. The Kelari will not align themselves with the lost cause." The transmission ended abruptly, and Ilara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The first step had been taken, but the road ahead was fraught with peril. She couldn't afford to fail. The galaxy's future and humanity's survival depended on it. The Vanguard moved swiftly through the asteroid belt, the crew's nerves on edge after the tense meeting with the Kalari. Ilara stared out the bridge window, watching as chunks of rock drifted by, their jagged surfaces reflecting the pale light of distant stars. She had convinced Talon to meet, but that was only the beginning. The Kalari had agreed to talk, but there was no guarantee they would act. Every second mattered, and the galaxy was slipping further into chaos with every passing moment. The ship's engines hummed beneath her feet, but the steady rhythm couldn't drown the sense of unease creeping into Ilara's gut. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, that an unseen enemy was already planning its next move. It was too quiet, too still. The Kalari had always been diplomatic, but Ilara knew there was a darker side to their politics, one that might be unwilling to trust humanity ever again. "Captain," Nara's voice pulled Ilara from her thoughts. "We're picking up an anomaly on long-range scans. It looks like a fleet, but it's using advanced stealth technology." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. "Are they hostile?" "We're not sure yet. They're not responding to hails." Ilara's instincts flared. There were only a few factions with the technological ability to cloak entire fleets, and the Drael and Varka were the prime suspects. They had both been watching the human fleet closely since the Vanguard had left the Federation's last stronghold. Could it be that the Drael had already discovered humanity's fragile alliance attempts? "Alert the crew," Ilara ordered, her voice cold and steady. "Set the shields to full. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. I want to know everything about that fleet." The crew sprang into action, hands flying across consoles, while Ilara's eyes remained locked on the display. Her thoughts raced, each one more disturbing than the last. If the Drael or Varka had found them this early, they would strike without hesitation, hoping to cripple humanity's attempts at rebuilding the coalition. But why the stealth? Why hide? The answer came to her in a flash. This wasn't about a direct confrontation. This was sabotage. The Vanguard shuddered as a ripple of energy washed over the ship. A silent attack. A burst of jamming from a cloaked vessel had disabled their long-range communications. Ilara clenched her fists, realizing that their position was compromised. They couldn't warn the Kalari or any other faction that might have been planning a rendezvous. "Tracking them now," Nara called out, her voice tinged with urgency. "They're coming in fast from the rear." A sudden flash lit up the sensors. An explosion rocked the ship, sending a shockwave through the hull. The Vanguard lurched violently, throwing the crew off balance. Ilara's stomach twisted, but she didn't flinch. "Status report," she barked. "We've taken a hit to the starboard engines," Nara replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Shielding is holding, but we won't last long against another barrage." Ilara's mind raced. She knew they couldn't take another hit like that. The ship's weakened state would make them an easy target. But there was something else she needed to consider: the Kalari. If this stealth fleet wasn't just a random attack, but a targeted strike meant to stop the peace talks, there was a deeper conspiracy at play. Someone, maybe even someone within the Kalari or their allies, didn't want humanity to succeed. "Prepare to jump to a nearby system," Ilara ordered, her voice sharp with command. "I'm not letting them trap us here. Nara, get us into a blind spot. I need to know where that fleet is coming from." As the crew scrambled to execute her orders, Ilara moved to the communication station. She was about to try a risky maneuver, a short-range jump to confuse their pursuers. But even as she gave the order, another realization hit her with brutal clarity. Whoever was behind this knew her moves. They'd anticipated her tactics. That meant there was a traitor on board. Someone who had access to their most secure plans. A sinking feeling settled in her chest. Not just a fight for survival. This was a fight against betrayal. As the Vanguard's engines powered up for a quick jump, Ilara's mind spun. Who could she trust? The Kailari, the crew, her own officers. She had to get to the bottom of this conspiracy. And fast. The galaxy's future depended on it. The Vanguard dropped out of jump space with a violent shudder, the tension in the air palpable as Ilara took her seat at the helm. The immediate danger of the stealth fleet had been temporarily evaded, but the looming uncertainty still clung to the crew like a shadow. Nara had navigated them to an uncharted system, a remote area where they could regroup and make repairs without the fear of immediate pursuit. But Ilara knew it wouldn't be enough. Whoever had attacked them wasn't done yet. They had been testing the Vanguard, probing its weaknesses. "We've got a small window," Ilara said, her voice firm. "Status report on the damage. Engines are back online, but it's going to take us at least 12 hours to patch up the hull and stabilize the power cores." Nara replied, her fingers working quickly over the console. "Shields are down to 40%, Captain." Ilara nodded grimly. "That's 12 hours we can't afford. We need to get to the Kailari. If we don't show up with something concrete, we'll lose them for good." The Kailari homeworld, Clyra, was a peaceful paradise in the center of the galaxy, a jewel of diplomacy and culture. But now, after the collapse of the Coalition, the once steadfast allies had grown wary of humanity's ambitions. With the Kailari split between factions advocating for peace and those calling for a more aggressive stance, their leadership was fragile. Ilara's failure to win their support would send a ripple effect across the galaxy, one that could mean the end of any hope for rebuilding the alliances. "Send the signal to the Kailari. Secure a meeting," Ilara ordered. "I want to make sure they know we're coming. Tell them we're not backing down." Nara nodded but hesitated, glancing at the command console. "Captain, I have to ask, are you sure we can trust them? The Kailari have their own reasons for staying neutral. And if the Drail or Varka have already made their move, I'm not sure they'll be on our side this time." Ilara's jaw clenched. She understood Nara's doubt, but the thought of failure gnawed at her insides. If she couldn't secure the Kailari's support, they'd be at the mercy of the Drail and Varka, with no allies left to protect them. "We don't have a choice," she said, her voice cold. "We go in, we show them we're still capable of keeping the peace. We won't let the galaxy fall into chaos." As the Vanguard limped toward the Kailari system, the crew prepared for the difficult negotiations ahead. Tensions were high. Every member of the crew knew the stakes. They had seen firsthand how quickly alliances could crumble, how fragile trust could be. The calm beauty of Clyra came into view, a lush, emerald world surrounded by glittering rings. The Kailari's majestic capital city, Velkar, rose from the planet's surface like a beacon of hope. Yet even as Ilara gazed at the distant horizon, a sense of unease crept into her mind. Would the Kailari welcome them with open arms, or would they shut the door on humanity's desperate plea for help? As the Vanguard entered the planet's orbit, Ilara prepared herself for the worst. A sudden beep from the communications console caught her attention. A message had just come in, and the words flashing on the screen made her heart skip a beat. "Warning. Incoming transmission from Velkar. Urgent." The message was from a Kailari official, a high-ranking diplomat who had been a key figure in humanity's past negotiations with the Kailari. But the words that followed were chilling. "We cannot trust you, Captain Storm. The Drail are not the only threat. There are those among us who have already made deals with your enemies. Do not approach the capital. Turn back now." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Ilara staring at the screen in disbelief. Betrayal. It was not the Kailari government that had sent the message, but a faction within their ranks. Those who feared humanity's involvement in galactic politics and saw them as a threat to Kailari sovereignty. Ilara turned to Nara, her face pale. "We're being set up." "But by who?" Nara asked, her voice low. Ilara didn't need to answer. The message had been clear. Someone within the Kailari was working against them, and whoever it was had already aligned themselves with the Drail and Varka. The peaceful image of the Kailari, their dedication to diplomacy and unity, was shattered. The galaxy's fate was slipping further from their grasp, and Ilara knew that she could no longer trust anyone in the galaxy, not even the Kailari. She had to find the source of this treachery, expose the traitor, and ensure that the Kailari didn't fall to the same fate as the rest of the shattered alliances. Ilara paced across the Vanguard's command bridge, her mind racing. The Kailari had always been known for their grace and diplomacy, but the message they had received was a stark reminder that even the most trusted allies could harbor treachery. The words from the Kailari diplomat echoed in her thoughts. The Drael are not the only threat. There are those among us who have already made deals with your enemies. Nera's voice broke through her thoughts. Captain, what are we doing? We can't just sit here. If the Kailari are already compromised, it's only a matter of time before the Varka or the Drael move in. We need to act now. Ilara's gaze flickered to the holomap of the system, where Clyra's orbiting stations glowed faintly. She had no intention of letting the Kailari fall to enemy hands, but she knew the window for action was closing fast. The galaxy's fragile peace was slipping further away with every minute they spent drifting in uncertain space. I'm not sitting idly by while the Kailari collapse under the weight of their own betrayal, Ilara replied, her voice hard as steel. Nara, get me a secure line to our contacts within the Kailari resistance. We're not giving up on this. Nara nodded, quickly manipulating the controls to contact a clandestine network of Kailari dissidents. This underground movement had been growing in response to the more hawkish factions in the Kailari government. They were wary of humanity's growing power, but understood that without the coalition, the galaxy's future was uncertain. The Kailari resistance might be their only hope for exposing the traitors within. A flickering image appeared on the screen, a Kailari operative cloaked in shadows, their face only partially visible. Ilara Storm. The voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. We've been expecting you. You've been followed. Ilara stiffened. By who? The faction within the Kailari government that's already aligned with the Varka and Drael. They're prepared to move on the capital, and their forces are already in the system. They intend to seize control of Velkar before you can make a move. You don't have much time. Then we need to act now, Ilara said, leaning forward. We can't let them take the capital. We'll expose them for what they are. The operative's image flickered. There's a hidden cache of intel on Velkar that could expose the Kailari collaborators. It's located in the city's central archives. If you can get to it before the traitors do, we may have a chance to turn the tide. Ilara's thoughts raced. The mission would be incredibly dangerous. Velkar was a sprawling metropolis, its high towers filled with Kailari officials who could either be allies or enemies. Time was running out. She turned to Nera. Prep the team. We'll take the shuttle in, and we'll get that intel. If we can expose the traitors, we'll have the leverage to sway the Kailari back to our side. Nera nodded, her resolve unwavering. Understood. I'll get the squad ready. As the Vanguard drifted closer to Velkar's orbit, Ilara stared out the viewport. The looming capital planet filled the horizon, its beauty and serenity masking the chaos brewing within. The Kailari's delicate balance of power was on the verge of destruction, and if they failed to expose the traitors, the galaxy would lose its best chance for stability. Ilara had always believed in the power of alliances, in the idea that unity could overcome any challenge. But the longer she spent navigating this treacherous web of lies and hidden deals, the more she realized how fragile those alliances really were. No one was safe, not even the Kailari. She had to move quickly. With the Kailari already divided and their enemies closing in, there was no room for hesitation. The fate of the galaxy depended on them exposing the hidden hands that threatened to tear the last vestiges of peace apart. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Velkar, its sleek frame cutting through the clouds as the sprawling city came into view. Ilara's eyes narrowed as the buildings below shimmered with the light of the setting sun. It was hard to reconcile the beauty of the planet with the darkness that had taken root within its government. The Kailari were once known for their peaceful ways, But Ilara could feel the tension in the air. Something had shifted, and now, the very heart of their capital pulsed with deceit. "Steady," Ilara muttered under her breath, watching as the shuttle's landing gear touched down on the outskirts of Velkar, far from the prying eyes of the government security. "Let's make this fast." Nara, who had been silently analyzing the data feeds on her console, looked up. "We've got a window. The central archives are heavily guarded, but we'll have an opening if we move quickly and stay low." Ilara nodded. The Kilari had been preparing for a possible attack, and they'd fortified the archives. But they weren't expecting a small, covered team slipping through the shadows. They had to rely on stealth. Time was running out. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and Ilara stepped out, her boots crunching against the hard ground. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying the faint scent of Kilari flowers. But the peace of the surroundings only heightened the sense of urgency. They had no idea how long they had before the faction's forces realized they were on the move. "Let's move out," Ilara ordered, her voice sharp. "Nara, you and I will head for the archives. Everyone else, stay alert and cover our backs." The team of 4 moved quickly, slipping into the narrow alleys between buildings. The neon lights of Velkar's entertainment districts flickered above, casting eerie shadows across their path. It was quiet, too quiet. The bustling city had a coldness to it, a heavy silence that Ilara couldn't shake. The people had no idea what was happening just beneath their feet. Their world was about to change forever. As they approached the archives, Ilara's hand instinctively reached for the communicator on her belt, checking the signals once more. The resistance contact had been clear. The intel they needed was hidden in a vault deep within the archives, protected by layers of security, both physical and digital. If they could access it, they could expose the traitors within the Kilari government and prove that humanity's efforts to rebuild the coalition were justified. But getting in would be the hardest part. The building loomed ahead, its grandiose exterior a stark contrast to the battle that was taking place behind closed doors. Kilari guards patrolled the area in pairs, their movements synchronized, trained for efficiency. But Ilara wasn't afraid. The Vanguard's crew had faced far worse odds, and she knew their skills would carry them through. They just had to stay out of sight. Nara signaled them to stop. They were just outside the archives now, and Ilara could see the heavily armed guards stationed at every entrance. This wasn't going to be easy. "Leave it to me," Nara whispered, pulling a small device from her belt. It was a hacking tool, one of many she had salvaged during their previous missions. She plugged it into a nearby terminal, and within seconds, the security system flickered to life, its interface displaying the hidden access codes to bypass the guard's surveillance. Ilara held her breath. The system was sophisticated, but Nara was faster. They had only minutes before the guards would notice something was off. Nara's fingers danced across the holographic screen, inputting the codes with rapid precision. The door to the archives creaked open, and the team slipped inside, unseen. The air was cooler in the inner sanctum, the dim light of the building casting long shadows over the rows of data terminals and secure vaults. Ilara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. The intel they needed was somewhere in this labyrinth of files and documents. "Keep an eye out," Ilara muttered to the team. "We can't afford to be interrupted." They moved deeper into the archives, avoiding the main patrols and taking advantage of the labyrinthine layout. The vault where the most sensitive data was kept was just ahead. Ilara's hand hovered over her sidearm as they reached the final door, heavily guarded, protected by the most advanced security. "This is it," Nara said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll need a minute to crack this." Ilara nodded, her gaze darting to the darkened halls. She had a bad feeling about this. Something didn't feel right. As Nara worked, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The quiet tension was unbearable. Then the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears. Their window of opportunity was closing faster than she expected. "Move," Ilara barked. Hurry up, Nara. As Nara continued to work, Ilara's mind raced. If they couldn't crack the vault now, all of their efforts would be for nothing. But something else nagged at her, the feeling of being watched. The traitors within the Kilari were moving fast, and they wouldn't let humanity get in the way. They had to get that intel, and they had to do it now. Nara's fingers flew over the terminal's interface, her eyes locked on the security grid as it flashed with encrypted codes. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, her every instinct screaming that time was running out. The footsteps outside the vault were closer now, and the tension in the air thickened with every passing second. "Come on, Nara, we don't have much time," Ilara whispered urgently, her eyes scanning the dim hallway for any sign of movement. I know, Nara muttered, her voice tight with concentration. "Just need one more minute. We're in the final layer of the encryption." Ilara barely contained her frustration. The seconds felt like hours. Every step that echoed from the hallway sounded like it could be the beginning of a confrontation. Her mind raced, formulating escape plans, even as she hoped they wouldn't have to use them. Behind her, a low hum from the terminal signaled Nara had succeeded. The vault's heavy door creaked open with a quiet groan. Nara shot Ilara a quick look, her eyes flashing with determination. "Got it," Nara said, barely a whisper. "We're in." Ilara nodded, stepping forward with a sense of urgency, but also caution. The vault room was filled with rows of data storage units, each one containing highly classified documents, reports, and recordings from Kilari officials. But it was the central terminal, locked away in the farthest corner, that held the key to everything. Inside was the data they needed to expose the traitors who had made deals with the Varka and Drail. As Ilara approached the terminal, her breath caught in her throat. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she saw a familiar name on the screen, a name that shouldn't have been there. It was a list of high-ranking Kilari officials who had been selling out their people, but the last name on the list sent a wave of shock through her. "Wait." Ilara's voice faltered for a second, disbelief clouding her judgment. "This can't be right." Nara stepped up beside her, glancing at the screen. Her face paled as she took in the same name. "It's him," Nara whispered, her tone low and filled with shock. "Admiral Kale. He's one of the main negotiators with us. He's been selling us out from the inside." Ilara's chest tightened. Admiral Kale had been one of humanity's most trusted Kilari allies, an influential figure who had always been a vocal supporter of the coalition. If Kale was involved, then the entire foundation of their plan had been compromised. The Kilari resistance, the fragile alliances they had been working to rebuild, it was all in jeopardy. "How is this possible?" Ilara breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "He's been a key figure in our talks, and now he's working with the Drail and Varka. What does he gain from this?" Nara's brow furrowed. "The same as everyone else. Power, control, a seat at the table when the galaxy is divided." Ilara clenched her fists, feeling the weight of betrayal press down on her shoulders. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was the destruction of everything they had worked for. The Kilari's stability was crumbling, and with it, humanity's hope of rebuilding the coalition. They couldn't let Kel's treachery remain a secret. "We have to expose this," Ilara said, her voice steely with determination. "We'll broadcast this information to every major system. The galaxy needs to know who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." Nara quickly downloaded the files from the terminal, her fingers a blur as she ensured the data would be broadcasted securely. "I'm transferring it now." "But we got to move. There's no way this won't alert the Kilari government." Ilara nodded. "Let's go. We can't afford to stick around." But as the team turned to leave, a loud crash echoed down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots. The door to the vault room slammed shut, and the team froze. "They're here," Ilara muttered, her voice low but urgent. From the shadows, figures emerged, Kilari soldiers, their weapons drawn and their faces cold. At the front of the group stood a tall figure, his sharp features unmistakable. Admiral Kale. Ilara Storm. Kel's voice was cold, calculating. I thought I'd find you here. It seems you've uncovered my little secret. Ilara's heart sank as she stood face to face with the very man she had trusted. The betrayal stung, but she knew there was no time for regret. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Kale. Ilara's voice was icy, her eyes hardening. This isn't just a betrayal of humanity. You've sold out your own people for the Drael and the Varka. You're responsible for the collapse of everything we've built. Kale smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. You've misunderstood. I'm not the one who's responsible. I'm simply taking the side of the winning faction. The galaxy is changing, Captain, and your outdated ideas of peace are what will hold it back. Before Ilara could respond, a shot rang out, echoing through the cold, empty halls. The team immediately went into defensive positions as Cal's soldiers raised their weapons. Move, Ilara shouted, pushing the team toward the exit. They had the intel. Now they just needed to escape before Kale and his soldiers sealed their fate. But as the door to the vault slid shut behind them, Ilara realized they had no choice but to fight. The stakes had never been higher. The loud clang of the vault door sliding shut was drowned out by the rapid thump of Ilara's heart as she and her team backed into a corner. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and soon the darkened hallway was filled with the sharp click of weapons being readied. They were trapped. Cal's cold voice echoed from the other side of the vault. You think you can expose me without consequences, Captain? You've underestimated me, and now you'll pay the price for it. Ilara gripped her weapon, her knuckles white from the pressure. The path ahead wasn't just filled with the threat of capture. It was filled with the realization that Cal's betrayal could fracture their entire alliance with the Kailari. But this wasn't the time for regret. The intel was secure, and they had to make it out alive. Nara, how much longer? Ilara asked, her voice low but urgent. Nara's hands flew over the hacking terminal, her eyes focused on the encrypted data transfer still in progress. I'm almost there. Just a few more seconds. We can't afford to stay here much longer. A shot rang out, narrowly missing Ilara as it embedded into the wall behind her. Her team immediately returned fire, the bright flashes of energy weapons lighting up the hallway. Move, Ilara shouted, pulling her team into motion. We need to get to the shuttle. Now. The sound of the firefight echoed through the halls, a cacophony of danger. The Kailari soldiers weren't just trained, they were prepared for an assault like this. But Ilara's team was well versed in fighting against the odds. They knew the terrain better than any enemy soldier could. Cover the rear, Ilara barked, taking the lead as the team sprinted toward the nearest exit. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow hallways, a constant reminder that they were running out of time. The whole Kailari complex was on high alert, and every moment spent evading capture brought them closer to a deadly confrontation. Nara, lagging behind as she continued to transmit the data, shot Ilara a look. I've got it. It's done. The data's being broadcast across all secure channels. Ilara barely acknowledged it, too focused on getting them out alive. Good. Now let's get to the shuttle. We've still got a chance to make it out before they lock this whole place down. But as they rounded a corner, the sharp sound of blaster fire tore through the air, followed by the unmistakable voice of Kale, barking orders to his soldiers. Don't let them escape. They have what we need. Find them. Ilara's stomach twisted, the thought of Kale chasing them down driving her forward. This was no longer about just survival. It was about keeping the galaxy's future intact. If they lost this data, humanity and the Kailari would never recover. The Varka and Drael would have already won, and their alliance would shatter before it ever truly began. We're getting close, Nara shouted, glancing over her shoulder as a burst of energy hit the wall beside her. But we got incoming. From around the corner, a wave of Kailari soldiers emerged, their blasters raised and their expressions grim. Kale had anticipated their every move, and now they were cornered. The shuttle was just ahead, but there was no time to make a clean escape. "Formation," Ilara shouted. "Hold your ground." The team quickly took up defensive positions, weapons raised, as the soldiers advanced. There were too many of them, and their training made them relentless. Ilara could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had no choice but to fight. There would be no more running. One of the soldiers fired, and Ilara ducked behind a pillar, narrowly avoiding the blast. Her mind raced, formulating plans. If they didn't stop these soldiers now, they wouldn't make it to the shuttle. But they were fighting an overwhelming force, and the odds seemed insurmountable. "Ilara, I can create a distraction," Nera offered, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Just give me a few seconds." Ilara hesitated, glancing at the soldiers closing in. "Do it. We're running out of time." With a quick nod, Nera pulled a small device from her belt, a powerful EMP grenade. She hurled it down the hallway, the device whistling as it traveled through the air. The moment it detonated, a flash of blue light erupted, temporarily disabling the soldiers' blasters and the security systems that had been tracking them. "Now," Ilara shouted, pushing her team forward. In the confusion that followed, they broke from cover and sprinted down the hallway toward the shuttle bay. Their breaths were ragged as they raced through the compound. But they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. As they reached the shuttle, Ilara's eyes scanned the area. The bay was empty, save for a few Kailari guards, who quickly raised their weapons as they approached. Without hesitation, Ilara fired, incapacitating one of the guards while Nara and the others followed suit. With the bay now cleared, the team rushed inside the shuttle. Ilara took the pilot's seat, quickly powering up the engines. As the shuttle's ramp closed, she felt a sense of relief wash over her, but it was fleeting. They had made it out, barely, but the fight was far from over. As they ascended into the sky, Ilara glanced back toward the Kailari capital. The betrayal had been exposed, and the galaxy was about to change forever. But the journey ahead was uncertain, and the consequences of this battle were still unfolding. They had a long road ahead of them, and there was no telling what the future would hold. The shuttle rocketed through the upper atmosphere, leaving the Kailari capital far behind. Ilara leaned back in her seat, her breath slow and deliberate as the tension of the escape began to ebb. Yet, even as the stars outside the viewport slowly shifted into the vastness of space, her mind remained sharply focused on the magnitude of their success and the uncertainty that awaited them. "Do you think Cal will be able to cover his tracks?" Nara asked from her station, her voice laced with both exhaustion and anticipation. Ilara shook her head. "No, not this time. The data we've broadcasted is already spreading. He can't control the narrative anymore. The galaxy will know what he's done." "But it won't be enough to stop the war," said Cabby, one of Ilara's trusted lieutenants. He'd been quiet until now, but his words echoed with the truth that had been gnawing at Ilara's thoughts. Cal may have been the puppet master behind some of the Kailari's most vital allegiances, but he's not the only one with a hand in this. We've exposed one piece of the puzzle, but the bigger picture is still out there. Ilara clenched her fists. Cavi was right. The war for the galaxy's future was far from over. With Kel's treachery now public knowledge, there would be far-reaching consequences. The Kailari might retaliate, and their once sturdy alliances with humanity would be put to the test. The Varka and Drail would likely use this as an opportunity to sow further division. "Then we make sure we're ready for whatever comes next," Ilara replied, her voice hardened with resolve. "Humanity didn't get this far by letting enemies tear us apart. We rebuild, we adapt, and we fight harder than ever." As the stars streaked past, the ship's sensors flickered, alerting Ilara to an incoming transmission. She quickly accessed the signal, her eyes narrowing as a familiar voice came through the comms. "Captain Storm, this is Counselor Asha of the Kailari Resistance. We've received the broadcast. Kel's betrayal is undeniable." The Kalari Council has convened an emergency session. We're cutting all ties with the Drael and Varka factions. However, we understand that this is just the beginning. We need your help. We must form a united front before the galaxy falls into chaos. Ilara's heart quickened. The message was a lifeline, but it was also a call to action. The Kalari were willing to break from their previous alliances, but the question remained, could they trust each other enough to form a new, stronger coalition? Could they truly stand together against the growing tide of the Varka and Drael forces? "We'll be there," Ilara said, her voice resolute. "Prepare for our arrival, Counselor. This time, we'll rebuild from the ashes. We won't let Kel's betrayal define us." The transmission ended, and Ilara sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. The galaxy had been shaken to its core, but in that turmoil, there was hope. A chance for unity, a chance for rebirth. Nera approached her, her expression serious. "What's our next move, Captain?" "We rendezvous with the Kalari resistance at the neutral zone. We need to be there when the Council meets. This is our moment to reshape everything we'd fought for." Ilara's eyes were hard with determination. "We'll forge new alliances, ones built on trust, not manipulation. Humanity will lead this charge." The crew members gathered around her, each of them nodding in agreement. The fight wasn't over, but they were ready. The foundation of a new era was being laid, and it was in their hands. As the shuttle entered hyperspace, Ilara looked out at the endless expanse of stars. There was still so much to be done, so many challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to hope. The galaxy was broken, but it was not beyond saving, and they would be the ones to rebuild it.